Friends, Zach here with another devotional connection. And last week I was spending some time in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 through 10. Today I'll be in verse 10. So I'll recap really quickly with verse 9 and then segue into verse 10. So again in verse 9, Paul says that God said to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, Paul, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Therefore, Paul says, "I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that way the power of Christ may rest upon me." And we discussed that, you know, Paul's weaknesses or our weakness isn't an obstacle for God's power, but it becomes a tool or a means by which God's power is magnified. If we look through the Old Testament and through different stories of Scripture, oftentimes we find that God and Jesus chooses to use the least of these so that way his power might be on full display. Because sometimes I believe we try to shadow God's power with our strengths. But what Paul is saying here is no, our weaknesses magnify God's power. And I thought verse 10 was also worthy of reflection. Verse 10, he continues, "For the sake of Christ, then I am," the word is content. I am happy. I am content. I am fulfilled then with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, that is then when I am strong. Now, one thing I notice about this trajectory or this list of challenges is how they go from inward, some of our own challenges that we deal with personally, to external circumstances that exist beyond our control, right? So we have weaknesses, internal, Paul's own shortcomings or yours and I's. Then we have insults, those things that begin to happen to us that in some way, whether indirectly or directly, have to do with us. Then hardships, some of those challenges that both you and I go through personally. Then persecutions, that is what is done to us despite us. And then calamities, that is what happens to us regardless of whether or not we want these things to come upon us. So what I notice is that Paul is saying in each of these circumstances, he has learned to be content or okay with them because he understands that when he is weak, then the power of Christ can be most magnified and be strong. Now, I don't believe Paul is saying go out there and, get yourself in trouble and let's get ourselves in trouble and face some difficulties. No, I believe what Paul is saying here is despite all these difficulties coming into our lives, even some of these circumstances that we have no control over, we can walk confidently in our relationship with God because we can know that in each of these challenges, even in our own weaknesses, that the power of God is strong and continues to rest upon us. So, whatever challenges or difficulties that you begin to face today, whether it's personal, something that results from us, from our difficulties or shortcomings, or external from us, whether it's something that's beyond our control, Paul says in both these areas of weaknesses, in both these areas of circumstantial hardships or difficulties, we can still learn to not just be strong in Jesus, but also, I love what he says, content with him. So it's not we're just pushing our way through these or forcing our way through some of these tough experiences. While there may be a measure of that, there can also be a contentment in each of these because we know from where our help comes from. We know that our help comes from Jesus and we can rest confidently in him.